My partner started selling boxes, and that's 100 pounds at a time. He ended up buying a jet. He ended up buying $300,000, $400,000 in cars. It started off as, young college kids with like kind of this dream of selling pot to buying houses, jets, really doing big boy crime. I grew up on a small farm in what's called Blountville, Tennessee. It's about 15 miles away from Bristol, Tennessee. Bristol, Tennessee, it's pretty notorious for being a town of two states. So one side of the street is Tennessee, the other side of State Street is Virginia. And where I grew up, my story involves cannabis. So growing up in the South, pre-legalization anywhere in the country, it was heavily, heavily criminalized. So meaning anything above 14 grams is a felony, and that's including, if you have seeds in the bag, stems, all that's included. The bag is included. So you could theoretically have an eighth, but get charged with a felony just for having the wrong type of container.
Right.
And so that's where I grew up. I grew up in a very small rural type area. I grew up Catholic, going to a Catholic school, choir boy type situation. Never thought I would even get into cannabis use. Kind of, was kind of sheltered. I didn't really have too much public schooling until my parents got divorced, and then long story short, I ended up in high school starting to experiment, and that was only because I wanted to impress a female. And I was like, dude, this girl's she's a stoner. She's beautiful. I want to, smoke weed. I'm like, and I always had been kind of fascinated about it because, number one, growing up in the South, there's a lot of rebellious type behavior, whether it's like moonshine or smoking cigarettes or whatever you're doing, So when people are talking about cannabis, it kind of just always, sparked my interest. So I ended up starting to smoke. And the first time I smoked, it was with her, and I didn't even get, baked or nothing. It was like, wow, this is kind of weird. And then the second time I remember I was blitzed, and she would always smoke this insane weed. She'd always buy the gram back then. No one bought eighths, or in Tennessee, people were buying grams of dank for, $20 to $25 a gram.
Right.
And from then I was just like, I fell in love, and then I will never forget. I was working at a place called Cheddar's, which is like a cheesecake type factory place. And I was supposed to be a food runner. I trained to be a food runner. That was what I was supposed to be. And the day of opening, the culinary assistant, the guy who actually placed the food, didn't show up. So they're like, hey, you're not running food. You're being a culinary assistant. And the guy on the line was the former, well, I guess I don't even really know anymore, but he was a drug dealer, right? And he was the guy selling pot in the town. And so I'll never forget the first night I met him, he sold me a gram of weed on the back line, like plating food, for $15 a gram. And I was 17 at the time. And I was going into my senior winter session and about to become, graduate that spring. And so from there, it went from, I bought an eighth, an ounce, a quarter pound, all within like 3 weeks. And I went from a guy who had never smoked cannabis before to now, supplying all my friends allegedly. And it was quite an experience. And so with that being said, it was such a love. I'd wake up and, I would brew a cup of coffee for me and my weed dealer, and we would smoke a couple blunts, have a cup of coffee, and then I'd go to high school the last few semesters, last few months of this semester. And then that kind of led me into college, and college was just a real different animal. I wasn't focused on selling grams to my friends. It was about who could we get a good pound from, that's under, $1,000, $2,000. Cause like I said, weed there was going for $4,000 a pound minimum. And that's buying it at a wholesale level. Most of the time I think we were getting quarter pounds at the time for $1,200, $1,300 just for a quarter pound. So I go to college, I'm 17. just to kind of give you a little, I graduate, I'm still doing my thing. I go to Brazil for 2 months, I come back to go to college. And my dad's like, you cannot live in the dorm. You smoke way too much weed. You're going to get arrested here in Tennessee. Live with your brother. And so I got an apartment with my brother and a soon to be fraternity brother and my cousin. And I met through my fraternity, I had met a couple people and they were very significant people in my life. They became my best friend, pledge brothers. I don't know if you know anything about the fraternal life, but
a little bit.
Yeah, so it's just like, a weird way to become friends. And it's just interesting because these two guys, one at the time, now looking back on it, one was so experienced in cannabis and we were the same age and he was 17, but his family knew a lot of people from California. And so when he was 15, 16, 17, he was selling 20, 30 pounds, a week easily. And, you're talking a lot of money as a young kid in Tennessee. His unfortunately, his father passed away early on in his life. And so he was kind of, one of 3 boys and he was kind of, rebellious. And so that was one significant friend. And then I had another friend who I met in my fraternity who would then become a way bigger player than the friend that introduced us in the first place. And so college really is where cannabis then kind of went to the next level for me. Like I said, I was, just selling it by nickel and diming, just wanting to smoke for free. And my life changed one day when I went to my fraternity brother's house. It was like almost like That So 70 show. They had a green room and so I'm in this green room and it was like almost like a communal green room. Like you would go there just to smoke pot as you knew it was safe. Like the brothers didn't care that, they always had random people there. And I'll never forget I'm smoking. And at the time I got obsessed with making edibles because I would have so much extra cannabis. I was like, let's make some edibles. And so I made these blueberry muffins. And this is where a beautiful relationship was formed. I'm in this green room, I'm smoking, everything's good. This guy comes in, hey man, can I buy a couple edibles? My friend said you have strong edibles, and my other friend's in the hospital. I forget what it was wrong. He couldn't smoke, but he was a big stoner from North Carolina. So he was like, do you mind if I get in it? I was like, bro, here's a bunch of them. Take them to them. Have a good time. Like, cause I didn't really care. I've always been very kind with my cannabis because I felt like it was something to be shared. And he literally looked me in the eye and he said, you don't know who you just met? And I was like, no, I don't. What's your name? And he's like, Will. And this Will character, I don't even know if it was his real name or not, but he ended up being from Humboldt. And he was from a big farm in Humboldt County, California, in like the Eureka area and like all that big area, like the Emerald Triangle, they call it.
Right.
And he looked at me and he was like, dude, you're such a nice guy. I'll give you pounds for $1,200. And I looked at him. I was like, what? $1,200 for a pound? I was like, I'll buy one right now. And he's like, all right, if you give me the money, it'll be there. And I forget, I think it was like 5 days, something like that. So it came in and it was crazy because it was terribly shipped, terribly sealed. And we were like thankful that it even got to Tennessee. And we busted open. I sold it to 4 fraternity brothers, $1,000 a piece, allegedly. So I turned $1,200 to $4,000 in 10 minutes and just made everybody's day because they just got it for $200, $300 cheaper. And it was some of the best. I'll never forget. It was OG Kush. Like it was like the real OG Kush. Like you can hardly even find it on today's market. Like it was a very, like it was, like I said, a beautiful relationship.
Okay.
And so that led into getting another pound sent in. And I think
mailing it in.
They were mailing it in from Humboldt to Tennessee. One of my fraternity brothers, who I'm about to actually tell you about, but later, this is where it escalates. It's fun. It's funny because I got in trouble in 2013. So that's 10 years ago, coming up December, I think it was 13. 13 is when I got arrested, 13. Right. My business partner, we have a legal hemp farm, Wax Brothers, and he got federally indicted, I want to say in 2018. So there's a long, it's kind of a long progressive of a story. So I graduated in 2012. Right now, what I'm talking about is 2012, the fall and going into 2013, I get arrested at the end of the year 2013.
Okay.
So I get this connection in Humboldt, and one time I'm at my fraternity house, and I was always the guy who rented a room at the top. It was the window room. I rented the window room. I never really drank too much. I tried to make good grades, and I would sell my weed at the parties. And I'll never forget, this big, highly respected fraternity brother comes up to my room. He knocks on the door, and it's like kind of a hierarchy thing. We let him in. How are you doing? Very nice to meet you. I've been like dying to meet you. Everybody talks. You're a legend in the fraternity. And he goes, listen. He's like, I heard you sell weed. And I was like, yeah, man. Do you want some weed? And he's like, no. I just want you to take me home, and I want to smoke with you at my house. Long story short, this guy was one of the most talented cultivators I've ever met to this day. And so therefore from that, and it was during the same period. So at that point I had a local grower who was growing like insane small batch indoor, which I would still buy it at almost $3,000 a pound. And then I would have my California connect having the $1,200 a pound flower. Both very high quality. One was to make money off of, one was to really enjoy the connoisseur level of flower. So that's where I was.
What? I don't know what flower is.
Flower is the actual like a cannabis flower that you like grind up, you smoke, traditional way to consume cannabis.
Okay.
And so
I know nothing about.
Oh,
cannabis.
really?
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. So if there's anybody listening, they'll know very familiar what I'm talking about.
I'm sure I'll get some comments like, Cox, what are you doing? You don't know what,
Yeah.
But I mean, I've written some stories about, guys that have sold, but, I've never heard that term. But anyway.
So what it's great that you actually ask what flower is, because the next part of the story transitioned into when BHO, it's Butane Hash Oil, came to the scene about 2012 to 2013 in East Tennessee. That's what is now known as dabs, concentrated cannabis. And so I was steadily doing my thing, had no problems. I knew everybody I was messing with. Fast forward to fall of 2013. My brother, who's my fraternity brother, but my actual biological brother, was dating a gal at the time. And she's like, hey, I know you like dabbing, and my friend has, a lot of wax, and he's a really nice guy. He's in this other fraternity. And I actually knew him through another fraternity brother that grew up with him. And so I started hanging out with this dude, and I would sell him my super fire weed in order to buy all of his wax. It was a very interesting thing. And then at one point he was like, hey, I can't afford this. Can you front me? And fronting means a consignment. I'm going to give it to you. Right. You're going to pay a tax. You're going to pay me off the back end. And so I was like, sure, as long as you can give me the dabs, because that's my whole thing. I love concentrates. My alter ego through law school was Dabino, and it's just like so dabs like hit a hard. I'm like, dude, I'll do whatever you want just to keep the dabs coming in. So this is where it got tricky, and I started getting what was at the time I didn't know, but I was being surveyed by local law enforcement, Johnson City Police Department, and a organization called Tennessee Bureau of Investigation.
When you say surveyed, you mean like investigated?
Investigated, like heavily investigated, because at the time, the guy that was giving me these dabs that I met through my brother's girlfriend,
right,
he had totaled a highway patrol car with like an ounce of cocaine in his possession. So he ended up having to become a rat. And so who was the easiest person to tell on? Fratty Patty, the guy with the, my hair was like long, I had it was very interesting time in my life. And so I started working with him, and these guys were surveying me. And at the time I also, it's funny because I never even really got that much weed from this guy that I got in trouble from. But during my actual arrest, I had met another guy I got weed from working at a burrito spot. And it was the best burrito spot in town. It's kind of like Tex-Mex, but it's really like family ran and operated. So it's just a really cool place to work. And this guy working was like, man, we're like family here. I'll do whatever. And so he would help me out and get weed. So I went to his house, this is leading kind of when I was, it's leading up to my arrest, which was absolutely caught me off guard. Cause when I was when I got arrested, I had planned to go to Colorado on a Friday. I get done with my classes and I ended up getting arrested. But I'm going to tell you the full story of how I got arrested. And
Okay.
so it's like an everyday, and I finished my test and I go over to my friend's house. At first I go to McDonald's. This is where it's very key fact. I go to McDonald's to pick up money that this guy, John Doe, that I gave him £1 he was going to pay me for. I get to McDonald's, and little did I know I was being recorded. I'm being recorded by Tennessee Bureau of Investigation over a single pound. And this guy gives me Blue 100s. And I don't know if you remember, but when Blue 100s first came out, it was like 2013 time. They weren't very common, So when he gave me 40 Blue $100 bills, I even remember in my head telling my lawyer, I was like, I thought it was crazy he had 40 Blue $100 bills. I had never seen more than like 2 at a time before. Little did I know that those bills, how Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, how they did it, if they got, these are Pokemon cards, but if they were dollar bills, they put them all like the same way and put a line, just a little marker line, and then they shuffle them all up. So you can't see the line unless the bills are all facing the same way.
Right.
So they recorded my conversation. I get this marked money. I go to my coworker's house. And thank God I wasn't with my other fraternity brother guy, because he's crazy. So I was happy that never happened. So anyway, go over to his house, and I hated his house in particular because it was in a school zone. So in Tennessee, how they have it, if you get caught doing any transactions in a school zone, there's mandatory minimums.
Yeah.
And so this was the mandatory minimum for this was 2 years mandatory minimum. You're staying every single day of those 2 years in a state prison. So I go to his house. It's Christmas break. He's like, hey, do you want to make some wax? And so allegedly we were like, sure, I would love to. He got this beautiful flower. It was biodiesel, which was like a popular strain. It's a type of cannabis. It was really popular in 2013. So we make some wax, and I take my first real big dab. Like, I am almost probably the most stoned I've ever been in my entire life. And little did I know, I was about to be arrested by like 17 cops. So I leave his house. Everything's normal. I see a car following me. I see another one following me. I'm like, what is going on? Then I see the lights go on. I'm like, oh God. So then I pull to the Earth Fairs parking lot. I get into the Earth Fairs parking lot, and I knew I was getting arrested. My gut feeling, there was no like, am I going to be able to get out of this? Like, no, you're not getting out of this. There's an open pound in your car. Smell is probable cause. There's a quarter pound in a lunchbox that I had in my front seat that was just extra pot laying around.
So you didn't think they were pulling you over because you ran a stop sign? You knew exactly, no, somebody set me up.
Oh, so as soon as I left that and I saw all the unmarked cars, it just like I said, it wasn't a police like sting. It was like a real Tennessee Bureau investigation. And I was like, this is not good. Okay. So this guy, I'll never forget, Agent Richie Walker, he came to my window, knocked on my window, and I'm like, I crack in. He's like, license and registration, not a problem, sir. Insurance, everything's here. He's like, you just left a known drug house off of Seminole Drive. And he's like, we can do this one of two ways. He's like, I want you to either consent to a search or tell me what is going on in that house, who's there, what they have. And I literally looked at him and I said, sir, this is my father's vehicle. I can't give you consent to this vehicle. And he said, yes, you can. You can give your dad a call right now. And I said, sir, my dad's a busy man. He usually doesn't answer his phone at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I can't do that. And he goes, okay, so you want to do this the hard way. So he makes me step out of the car immediately. Step out of the car. Please step over here, hands behind your back. We're going to call the police dogs. And I'm like, at this point, I know I'm fucked. I knew I was screwed. So so they bring the drug dogs in, and I'm standing there, hands behind my back, and one officer's telling me how I'm never going to be able to even graduate college. I'm going to be a convicted felon. I'm going to serve, good cop, bad cop, right? So this guy's telling me this. The other cop's like, hey man, it's really not that bad. You're just a college kid, blah, blah, blah. Just please tell us where everything's at, minimize your exposure. And I literally was like, I'm not saying anything, because I had previously was like a handyman for my dad's criminal defense attorney who handled contracts. And so he always said, he was a real Southern Virginia guy, and he said, don't say nothing. And so at that point I was like, I'm not saying anything. And Richie Walker, the big agent, comes over, and he's like, he starts asking me questions, and I'll never forget. I asked him, I said, sir, is this real life? Is this really happening? And because I was so stoned because I just took a huge dab. And he's like, yes, you're really getting arrested. And I was like, you can't arrest me. He's like, yes, I can. He's like, I can take your car. I said, how can you take my car? He said, Mr. Quinn, I seized a private jet last week. What makes you think I can't seize this little ridgeline here? And I was just like, oh my God. And then I said some regrettably stupid stuff to the cops. He comes up to me and he says, what are you gonna do with a felony on your record? You can't go to college. You're gonna be what about? He starts ridiculing me. And I looked at him, and I'm very thankful for my parents. They've done very well. And so I looked at him and I said, sir, I'll take $100,000 out of my trust fund and start a business. What are you gonna do for the rest of your life? Bust kids for pot? And this man, I'm not kidding you, grabbed me by my long hair. I'll have to send you a picture after this. Grab me by my long hair and just boom, right on my window of my car, slam my head. And that was it. I was like, I'm not fucking opening my mouth again. This is crazy. Like, then he said, I'll let you make one call. Who do you want it to be? And I was like, I'm going to call my dad. Like, fuck this. I'm definitely getting arrested. So I called my dad, and they made me, do the whole booking. I got arrested on felony, it was like conspiracy, possession to sale in a school zone, like this whole ordeal, like looking at 2 years mandatory minimum, potentially could even go higher. It was really scary. I get to the jail, and this is pretty funny. They put me on like a high bail, like as if I had murdered someone type of thing. Like, I think it was like $200,000. And my dad's like, I don't have $20,000 cash. Like, my dad's a doctor. He's a very old school guy, like credit card, pays it off to every month. It's like, who the fuck has cash just laying around? So he calls his mechanic who knew a bail bondsman, and they ended up bailing me out that night on just a consignment deal. Like, just my dad's like the little local doctor in the rural town,
Right.
So then I get out of jail, and it was the most uncomfortable feeling I've ever had. Not because I got arrested. I really didn't care about that. But just the look of not disappointment, but almost like my dad wanted to almost kill me type vibe. Because he looked at me and said, I will never forget. This is a true quote. He said, I don't know if I want to cry for you or punch you in the fucking face. I was like, oh my God. And so that led to a full 2-year process of litigating my case against me, because I was in an actual sting operation where they had an informant that had marked money, recorded my conversation, how I was about to pick up the best flower for him. And so it took full 2 years of litigating, and we ended up doing what was called at the time, I don't even know if the Tennessee Penal Code allows this, but it was called felony judicial diversion. So the judge allowed me to complete an extensive list of things, which was like a 8% completion rate, to earn a set aside / like an expungement, so my record would be sealed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And part of the condition was, I kid you not, was going to intensive outpatient rehab with real criminals that did real drugs. And
I mean, at that time, I can see that being part of.
Yeah. And I'll never forget, I was in there with a guy who was one of the best federal money counterfeiters in the US history. And he passed, I think it was like 10 out of the 13 bill tests they have at the federal level. And so long story short, when rehab, it was an eye-opening experience. It was very heartfelt. I realized that I didn't want to necessarily, do hard drugs, and I never really wanted to ever. But then actually seeing the impacts, and even alcohol abuse. I saw some people that were in there for like drinking, beating their wives type thing, and I was like a young 19-year-old kid, like, what the fuck? Like, this is crazy. So, and that leads kind of like into the other like exponential side of things too on my business partner side, because it's hard to tell my story without telling his story, because we were business partners in this cannabis stuff. And so I get in trouble over one single pound. I remember I cut off everybody for a year because my attorney was like, hey, you can't talk to anybody, they want you to tell on everybody. And I come from an old school family. Like, you do the crime, you do the time. Like, you're not telling on nobody. I don't care. Like, that's how my dad is. Like, he's like, one time I got in trouble with allegedly throwing water balloons at a homeless person in Virginia. And I was driving my friend's older brothers, and they take it really serious. There's a missile, they call a water balloon in the state of Virginia. And the cop that gave me my tickets, like, you'll see a counselor. And no, it was a judge. And I had no attorney. So my dad was my attorney, and my dad requested them to give me the max when I was like 16. So that was no sympathy there. So, but as I was in trouble going through this rehab, I contacted my partner. At this time, this guy had exponentially grew everything. You're talking from one single pound to 25, 50, a single box. So I went from supplying like your small local dealer to my partner supplying everybody and their brother at a wholesale level.
Right.
You really, at the time, it almost felt like we were in a movie, because here I am, I'm fighting for my life on felony probation, not even felony probation yet, felony court. I go over to my friend's house, and he's like a trap star. I mean, he had money, watches, girls, go out to the even as funny as this, because I think about it compared to some of the stories I've seen in California being a criminal defense attorney. I mean, you're talking about $400 at B-Dubs in Tennessee, Buffalo Wild Wings. That's not something that's like, you know what I mean? It's not like it's a little flex in Tennessee to be able to do something like that, not care. To go buy a $2,000 cabin, to go gamble $5,000 at the casino. Like, this was a very small town, like, it was crazy. And then it ended up being to the point where my partner started selling what was called boxes, and that's 100 pounds, at a time. And so this guy that he was working with was getting it from Oakland, and through Oakland, he would supply everything. I mean, some of the best cannabis that I've ever seen still to this day. And it was all flower. That was all he sold. There was no carts at the time, cartridges or like vape cartridges. There was nothing like that really at the time. And then the DEA started investigating them. And so the DEA started investigating my partner and this other gentleman. And it was really a full circle moment, because the postal inspector, it goes back to the original person I was getting my cannabis from in Eureka and Humboldt. We ended up stopping doing that because we had packages seized by law enforcement. One of the postal inspectors, his name was Postal Inspector Rob, is what he called himself. And he always came in like a luau shirt. Well, he had busted my partner in college and said, hey, quit this shit. This is a simple pound we're taking. You're not going to get in trouble this time, but you're on the radar. Well, my partner, I guess, didn't get the memo. And so here I am. I finally get my felony granting of diversion. My partner's trapping harder than ever before. I get on felony probation, and it was very strict. I'm having to pee in front of an old man, literally looking at me naked. Like, it was not, what an easy feat. I remember at orientation, felony orientation, Once the judge granted, it was an orientation, literally. It was like a Knights of the Round Table of all felons. And some people had got out and were on parole. Some people were just starting like me. Like, never forget, I met a guy who got caught with like a few hits of acid, and he had done like 10 years, full 10 years in the state penitentiary, and he was finally out and doing felony probation. And that's when I realized that the criminal justice system is completely set up for failure. And by the grace of God, I got the nicest probation officer in the office, named Mr. Mays. And Mr. Mays, at first, it was a very strict probation officer, but as time went on, he let me have my freedom the last 6 months. And by the grace of God, I got off felony probation. Got felony probation, and at that point, there's a key aspect too I wanted to bring up too, because I was on felony probation. Unexpected to us, Postal Inspector Rob was investigating my partner. Everybody knows I'm on probation because it's small town vibe. One day I don't go to my mom's house for the weekend. I stay at home. I get a box, and I'm like, what is this? I open up this box, and it's like pounds on pounds of weed. So I call my partner. I'm like, yo, what is this, dude? Like, is this you? And he goes, fuck, I'll be right over. And I was like, I remember I yelled at him, and I'm like, man, out of everything we've been through, I've had to bond out, pay a lawyer, fight a case. Now I'm on felony probation, and you send this shit to my house? And so he got crazy with it, and the guy that he was working with got crazy with it too, because he ended up buying a jet. He ended up buying like $300,000-$400,000 in cars. He bought cleaning businesses. It was to the point where it started off as, young college kids with like kind of this dream of selling pot, to the point where the people we were helping or move this cannabis were buying houses, jets, really doing big boy crime, really money laundering. And that's what my partner ended up getting indicted for, was a huge indictment of money laundering, conspiracy, but at a federal level, because Postal Inspector Rob had tracked down almost everything.
But you're out of it by this point. You're just finishing out probation, right? You're not
correct.
Selling anything.
By the grace of God, I never got brought into it, because at this point, me and my partner had started a business. Started a business, and the startup money came from this guy that was the guy, the head guy. And I'll never forget, my mentor attorney called me, and he's like, dude, I can't be associated with you right now because of this. He's like, you got me freaked out. I'm checking your partner's indictment every day pretty much. And so it was a very crazy thing. So I ended up getting my case dismissed. Never, it's not on my record anymore. But it really defined me as an individual. And when I mean that, number one, it really made me lose kind of trust to an extent. It kind of goes into the other story that I got to tell too, to reflect on it. But it just really raised awareness on the racial disparity, because I was able to get my case dismissed, no problemo, right? After paying a lawyer a premium, coming from Nashville to East Tennessee. I have a friend who's Puerto Rican and Dominican, and he doesn't have parents that have that much money, and he couldn't hire a private counsel, and he's a convicted felon over half an ounce of pot with seeds. So from that, when I went through my experience, becoming friends with him, seeing his experience and outcome, actually having to serve jail time, it never sat right with me. So that led me into my entire career. I was already studying criminology in college. I was already wanting to become a lawyer. I really wanted to make change in the system, not just be another pawn in the game, but really be a game changer. And so that's kind of what led me into my actual career. And so I met Mark and Craig, the Pot Brothers at Law, very early on in their debut online. It was about my junior year of college. This is right when I was getting off felony probation. And like I reached out and, I told them, what I wanted to do, and it was a great fit. And that led me to traveling the nation to actually really getting a lot of experiences, like really meeting George Jung, from Blow, and really meeting some of these big criminals like that then ended up, telling their stories and really having, really impactful conversations. And I think it all boils down to now me looking at my path from date of arrest, 10 years later, I'm out of law school. I don't sell weed. I do social media management and law. And so I always tell people, just because you were in a situation where you've been in trouble, you've had to go through the ringer, that doesn't define where you can go. And so that's like my personal story. Now, piggybacking off my partner's story, he got indicted, and he pled guilty. He was the last to the table, meaning everybody pointed on him and he was the last to the table. So he got the butt end of the stick. He went to jail. But he had the same mindset as me, and he was always infatuated with numbers. He's dyslexic. And so when he got out of jail, he started doing pallets, flipping pallets. And the pallet business is just like any other, drug or any other thing. It's just numbers. And he found tremendous success through flipping pallets, even after being a convicted federal felon. And it's been very interesting for me to see people that I know personally been in trouble and still have success and not let that define them. Because I think there's a lot of people that get in trouble and they think, oh, this is it. I can't do anything. So like I always like to speak when I tell my story to encourage others that if you have been in trouble or, are in trouble, it's not the end of it. It's not all say be all. You can file for expungements later on whenever you complete probations. And I encourage everybody to try to look into that if they've been convicted, because most of the time it's a simple form and you just file your form and you get expunged. Lawyers charge tens of thousands of dollars for it, but it's actually very straightforward. So I just like to always encourage people of that.
It's a little harder federal.
The federal is you got to get a pardon.
I don't know.
And the pardon it's a long shot,
Yeah.
and that's when you're talking about crime and criminals and, my whole thing is cannabis, like we've been talking about. And, we still have, upwards of 30,000 plus nonviolent, cannabis offenders in the federal system that are, still serving their time. And at this point, we've had multi-billion dollars of investments from, all around the world pouring into the cannabis sector when there's still people in jail, and I think it comes down to, it's kind of almost like a human rights issue. I don't think it's fair or right. And I think most people agree with that. But it is what it is. And then you got to even think about today that cannabis is still criminalized, and people will be like, maybe listening, like, what are you talking about? Cannabis is legal. It's legal to an extent. You can only possess a certain amount. If you can't smoke it in public, you can't smell like it and drive. I mean, it's pretty strict still and still highly criminalized. We see, at our office that we work with, we see dozens and dozens of people get cannabis DUIs. And a lot of it is just because they were speeding and they smell like cannabis. So the officers try to corroborate the two and equate, impairment.
So right now, what are you doing?
So right now I work for a workers' comp firm and a criminal defense firm. So I write motions for a criminal defense firm, and I primarily do workers' compensation with helping injured workers getting money from insurance companies.
Right. So this is the Pot Brothers.
The Pot Brothers at Law. Yeah. So I was interned to kind of associate with them And then I had what's called a provisional license through COVID. So I never even took the bar, and they gave me a license to practice under Mark Wasserman. And Mark and I, we did a lot of great things when I was licensed for almost 3 years. And right now we're actually writing an opposition to a motion from the district attorney that we actually had a DUI diversion granted, meaning we had a client that got a cannabis DUI, and we convinced a judge to grant diversion. And then the DA came back 2 years later saying that her dismissal should be set aside and she should have a conviction, because there was some case law that came down a couple years after we had entered this motion. And that case is really frustrating because that's a single mom who works for a very reputable city here in California, first-time offender, and her DUI stems from not using a turn signal and possessing an unopened cannabis vape. And that's what they wrote her up for, a DUI. And they said that because after they arrested her,
so she wasn't impaired.
She was not impaired.
She just had an open.
No, she didn't even have it open. They just said because she didn't use a blinker and she had some cannabis in the car that she was impaired. And then they take her blood. So this is how they get you. Once they say, hey, you're arrested for DUI and cannabis, you got to submit breath, blood, or urine, right? If they request it. So especially with drugs, so they will do blood. Anybody who uses cannabis, it stays in your blood for days, So she had cannabis in her blood, which makes an argument for them to say there was impairment accompanied with no blinker and cannabis. And it's just crazy to think about, of all the things they could be prosecuting in Los Angeles County, that they would go to the full extent to try to have a hard-working single mom's dismissal be set aside. I just think that's asinine, and they base it on a vehicle code that's 40-something years old.
Well, so much of the legal system is, asinine. So,
right.
It's seldomly is it connected to logic. It's more like they're just trying to gain points. So, okay, so that's what you're doing now, and you're doing stuff with the Pop Brothers.
Yeah, so
you're doing workers' comp. From
all this cannabis stuff, we created a brand called Wax Brothers, and we're a licensed hemp farm in Tennessee. We started in 2018, and it was right as my partner got indicted, actually. And he's not on paper a partner because he's a federal felon. So his dad is my partner on paper. But we had a nice project and we killed it. Unfortunately, we're currently in a lawsuit. Someone stole 24,500 pounds of our hemp that we contracted with. And we've been in a very serious civil dispute for almost 4 years now. And
so they got it and they received it and didn't pay for it?
It was supposed to be a deal where we delivered, we pay you X amount, you extract it, you give us the concentrate, we sell it as we go, and we pay you the rest of your tab off the back end. Long story short, they didn't even have the license to extract. They didn't know what they were doing. They were kind of trial and error. And after deposing them and all this stuff, we found out it was a complete shit show. So we sued under the New Jersey Fraud Act. And that's been going on for 4 years with a final arbitration date coming up any day now. The judge in arbitration, these old retired mediator arbitrating judges, they just are so slow. They don't care. Even if it's a lot of money, right. They just don't care.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope that works out.
Yeah, time will tell. Like I said, you want to do big business until you have big business problems, right? Everybody wants to have, the big glamorous farm and see all the stuff, but at the end of the day, there's risks, and that was part of it.
So what did the Pot Brothers do?
The Pot Brothers of Law, we're criminal defense attorneys and cannabis licensing experts here in California. So we help people get licensed and be compliant. We help them associate with the right vendors. And then on the other side is, like we said, so when people are operating, there's still people that get arrested. And there's regular people every day that get arrested. So we serve the Southern California and all the state of California for criminal defense needs, ranging from jaywalking to, pretty much anything, unless it's, we like to stay away from, domestic violence to an extent. We don't want anybody, we don't really do murder cases, primarily drug cases, stuff like that. But we handle all of DUIs, stuff like that.
Are these, are they on TikTok?
Yeah. So the Pot Brothers of Law, we're on all social media. So they are on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn. They are known for what's called the script. It's the 25-word script that makes sure all your rights, remedies, and defenses for court are reserved for when you go to court. We tell people it's not something that's going to get you out of jail free card, but if you get arrested and you stick to the script, you're going to have the best defenses for your attorney to use. Because admitting guilt and consenting to searches, all of that stuff, it's not in your favor. But to answer your question, yes, they're on social media, and they've done work with Snoop, Matthew McConaughey, Daniel Tosh. They've done work with a lot of cool people, and they're continuing to grow. Right now I think they're at like almost 750,000 followers on Instagram alone. I think they're at 400,000 on Facebook. I don't know the numbers as well as my partner does, but I can assure you that when you retain them, you get guys that care and love what they do. And I think that's why they've built a good reputation in the cannabis community and like the Southern California area, just for being straight up, because they're not going to tell you what you want to hear. They're going to tell you the reality of the situation, because there's a lot of attorneys that just take your money and then tell you what you want to hear until you're out of money. And then that's it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I know that I should probably interview them. That would be a good interview. That'd be a good interview to connect with your interview, actually.
Yeah. Mark and Craig. And the thing I loved about them is they knew my story from the get-go. And so Mark always tells people, he was my felon intern to associate attorney, and Mark is really like my biggest, cheerleader, always supported me when I was even freshly provisionally licensed to the bar. We were doing some like very intensive motions, and people were like, this kid's going to argue these motions. And Mark's like, yeah, and he's going to win them. I have no doubt. And we won them, and it's been a blessing.
Did you ever pass the bar?
No, I haven't passed the bar yet. So I'm taking the bar in February. So my provisional license expired in May of this year. So they gave it to me from 2020 to May of this year. And then it expired. And so now I just do motion work. So now I just, help write the motions, and Mark will then argue those motions on the record. And then in workers' comp, it's administrative court. So you don't have to have a license to be a hearing rep and appear on the record there.
Right.
So with my experience, I do some hearing rep appearance work with workers' comp. And I always have loved to help people. Both my parents are doctors. So I really like helping people in law, especially both sides, criminal defense and workers' comp. I'm helping injured people, either get a medical buyout that they need or get the medical treatment that they are due through workers' comp. In criminal defense, like I always tell people, I'm helping good people out of bad situations, similar to myself. I was a good person in a bad situation because someone else had totaled a police car and had an ounce of cocaine in its possession. It got me felony charges, felony bail, intensive outpatient rehab, like the whole 9 yards. I forget what the fines were. The fines were crazy. Like it was set up for failure, but through and through, I just stuck it out, and I really just believed in, I wasn't hurting anybody. And if I was in California, this would be technically legal. So I'm thankful for how everything panned out, and I'm happy to be able to have a platform myself, and for, being able to be with the Pot Brothers of Law, to be able to help. I think we hit like 7 million accounts in the last 30 days, 10 million accounts. So it's just nice to be able to help these people understand their rights when engaging with law enforcement, understanding, where to store your cannabis properly, understanding that, you don't want to tell on yourself. It's a really big blessing, because we get DMs and we get messages all the time and people thanking us. And, I get clients, former clients messaging me on holidays, thanking us for our service. So it feels good to really help out the community.
Cool. All right. Well, good. I appreciate, I appreciate you coming on and, being interviewed and speaking with me. And so, is there anything you're pushing, like any social media links, do you have anything like that, or it's just you're kind of under their wing?
No, I'd like to say I'm under their wing when it comes to the criminal defense and stuff like that, and speaking platforms. We usually attend the same events. You can check us out, Pot Brothers Allowed, all social media. My brand is Wax Brothers. That's kind of, my journey of getting arrested. We still stuck it out and created a successful farm, and we're looking to expand into the hemp market in Tennessee, and then hopefully one day international. But yeah, so Wax Brothers and Pot Brothers at Law. I'm Patrick, the Dabino, as people call me, because I love concentrated cannabis. And so if you guys ever need anything, feel free to reach out. We love helping people. We love, chopping it up in the DMs, emails. We like to communicate with our following.
All right, cool. All right. Well, hold on 1 second. 1 minute.
Not a problem.
Hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notified of videos just like that, or just like this one. And leave me a comment in the comment section, share the video, and please consider joining my Patreon. Thank you. See ya.